All right, guys, welcome to the podcast. My name is Wes, I'm an illustrator and a concept artist, and today I have Emil. Emil, can you give us a brief introduction?
Hi, my name is Emil Larsen, and I've been running a board game publishing company, like an indie, called Sun
Mhm.
Tzu Games. And
Mhm.
right now, I'm doing my project called Rogue Angels, which I just had on Kickstarter, and which I expect to deliver next year. So yeah, that's a very brief introduction of me.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen here because I want to show people like what it is that you're doing. What we're looking at right now is we're looking at the Steam page, and is this something that people can go and play now? I don't.
Yeah, I've had Rogue Angels on Tabletop Simulator as a mod there,
Hmm.
a free mod that you can go and play to your heart's content. It has almost half of the entire game there, and when I say half, I mean half of the campaign that you can play because it's a big sci-fi adventure campaign. So
Hmm.
yeah.
And what is the idea behind Rogue Angels? Like, is there like a story world that you were trying to create with this?
I think, like, I set out to create a game that solved two things or that could achieve two things. And this was after I played Mass Effect, the
Hmm.
video game,
Hmm.
the trilogy Mass Effect. I played that many times back in the days. And
Yeah.
at some point when I finished that, I'd already gotten into board games and board game development at that point, and I had released my first game called Burning
Hmm.
Suns. And I was like, why isn't there a Mass Effect board game? Like, I want to see this in a physical manifestation. And so I kind of put it on myself to, well, then I will have to create something like that. And I chatted with a friend of mine who's also designing games about like the challenge of that. And I said there are two things I want to. I want to create the feel of Mass Effect as a board game, and I want to make people cry because I kind of saw that as the ultimate achievement of creating a compelling story is if I could
Hmm.
make people emotional when it came to some of the resolutions in such a game.
Hmm.
So yeah, that kind of got me started, and I did a lot of brainstorming for many years and ping ponged with my designer friend Martin, who we sent each other some ideas and stuff, and then it kind of died out for a while. And
Hmm.
around, I think, 2020 or something, I got back into it, or maybe it was 2019, and I started looking at it, and I saw some ways to solve some of the problems I've had with design, or how to move the design along. And yeah, just got into it and started designing again. And the first testers I had were very positive. And even though I'd only done black and white prints, and I just said, like, you have to imagine everything. Here's just the gameplay and the story parts.
Hmm.
So you can read the story parts, you can play the elements, but there is nothing to entice you otherwise. and
Hmm.
and everyone was like, yeah, we can see this as a sci-fi, and we enjoy the bits and pieces of the story we can get so far. And from there on, I started pushing along and got illustrators on board and got 3D modeler for the design and whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, and you've done like exceptionally well on Kickstarter. I mean, you have so this
Hmm.
is on GameFound.
Yeah,
Uh,
now it's on
it's
GameFound. Yeah,
okay, but this is the total for the Kickstarter, the 149,000 euro.
I did 140,000 euros on Kickstarter,
Okay.
and then 14 days after I closed the Kickstarter, I put it on GameFound and continued there. So and then it raised, 9,000 euros on top of that. So we almost at 150,000 euros. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that is super impressive. I mean, what really drew me to wanting to interview you, because I typically have on here, I have on this podcast, I have comic artists and different people that are doing creative things, but I really like to highlight people that are doing their own games, because like we were talking about before, I feel like there's so many opportunities, and there's so many people doing cool stuff. Um, and so I really wanted to see if you could speak to, like, what was this process like of of building this board game. I mean, you had a couple of years of like building a community around it. Like, what was the process like for you? Did you have a clear idea of how you were going to do it, or did you have to figure it out along the way?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, there's the design part and there's the, you can say, community part, right? So as a publisher, you have to take on a lot of different roles, but many of them happen simultaneously, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I I I already had a, you could say, it's not an IP, as in you couldn't really, but I had a base from lore I had created for my first game called Burning
Mm-hmm.
Suns. And I wanted a sci-fi universe where you had different species and stuff fighting for dominance and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And after I'd created that, I did some other historical warfare game, and I wanted to get back into the sci-fi. And because the thing is, when you start as an indie, you
Mm-hmm.
your first product is your company, which means
Mm-hmm.
that I have a lot of my community who are very sci-fi. They're sci-fi fans, right? They love everything from Warhammer 40K to Star Wars and Star Trek and whatnot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and you want to build on that because now you have a community who also encourage that and who likes these sort of games, right? So, and I've always been a huge sci-fi fan, and just
Mm-hmm.
think that realm has not been explored that much during in the board game era.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of fantasy games and stuff. So I kind of wanted to dive even deeper into the science fiction, and started developing based on all the concept art and the original art from Burning Suns, and moved on with Rogue Agents. Okay, this was the first one was an empire building game. You see everything from from a helicopter. And what if we kind of dived in and saw these character, and yeah, and during that period from the first game and up to Rogue Angels here, I also met an author, who Lisa, who we started collaborating, and we wrote, and she wrote the books, and I just kind of like pinpointed a few things, and like did a lot of world building next to that. But she wrote 4 books in that kind of like setting, that world. And yeah, that got quite personal, with a protagonist and people you're kind of rooting for. And I also wanted those people to be people you could play as, right? And then you go into the role playing aspects of Rogue Angels, right? So, and so with all of that, I could kind of leak this into the community and start building some interest in a different type of game, but still set in the same sci-fi universe. So there's a huge overlap in the community interest, of course, right? When you keep within the same genre.
So okay, so the people that you were aiming this at was people that were interested in science fiction, and so that gave you kind of a branching off point to where it was like, well, you don't necessarily have to just market this at people that are interested in board games. It can be people that are interested in Star Trek, so like all these different other media parts, and you're almost building a kind of transmedia product yourself if you have somebody who's writing novels within this space as well. Was that kind of the idea that this would be something that would expand beyond just the board game?
It to some extent, yeah. You can never really control it because you never know how things will take off, and it could be that, and you experience that sometimes books are, hugely successful, but the movie adaptation is not, or vice versa, right? And and the same goes for games and different games in that crosses the same sections. But I always try to set out with potential in mind, so I always build with that potential in my back head. Like I want it to be bigger, but it doesn't have to. So it's like it's great if it can be bigger, it's great if it can expand, it's great if other people will be drawn in, and we can expand on both the experience and what else surrounding it. It doesn't have to, but when you take it into consideration early on, you often leave more room for these kind of things to happen. So it felt very natural to go back and forth between, you could say, going from the first science fiction game into the books, and then back to science fiction games now with the role-playing element or with a very personal story, right? So it felt very natural, and it seems like many people also enjoying that. And I hear from many of those who have also played the games that they have enjoyed the books, but that's just a positive outcome. It's not a necessary outcome, it's just great when it happens.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you did it that way, and that you say that it's kind of like a natural outcome, but it's not necessary for the player to be able to enjoy it. But what I think is interesting about that is that it's kind of speaking to the time that we live in now, where you're always carrying around a piece of that of your favorite media with you, and you can kind of interact with it in different ways it is that you want to. I mean, I can almost imagine, you could kind of go into like an audiobook place with some of the stuff it is that you're putting out, if you're putting together like these role playing, or I mean, not these role playing, but these novels as well. Have you ever considered that?
Yeah, actually, it's a very good point in terms of how I'm structuring the production of, because a lot of this has to do with how you produce the content that you're creating. So again, you don't have to, but when you do it properly from the beginning, it's easier to convert. So for example, now with Rogue Angels, I'm taking my Word documents, scrap easy to fit together and make prototype campaign, and I'm putting it into spreadsheets that allow me to, it's a friend who programs this for me, but it allows us to use programming to extract all the data and use for creating the books for the game. The game has these campaign books that you sit and read through, like choose your own adventure stories.
Okay.
But by arranging the data and everything that goes into the books in spreadsheets and in a proper data management fashion, this can easily be taken and converted into it could be a computer game, or it could be a companion app, or it could be a audiobook, as you mentioned, right? Like, because all the data is readily available and it's structured in a way that makes it possible to digest programming wise, right? So this is not it was not necessary. I could just continue in InDesign or Word and create my campaign books. But then down the line, if somebody says, oh, we would like to translate this so we can, localize the game, then I would have to pay for hours and hours of copy pasting and setting up the whole thing again. Or if a companion app has to be developed at some point, it doesn't take a long time because they just need some specific code in order to extract the data they need. So not necessary, but by building with a expansive end goal in mind, you can save a lot of time in the long run and a lot of effort. And for now, it will cost a month of work or something in total for getting this set up, but it is, one extra language or one companion app, and it's all worth it times 3 or 4. So
yeah, no kidding. That's a really interesting way of setting yourself up. Like you set up everything to expand into like multiple territories as you go along, as it's more and more successful. So we were talking a little bit about Kickstarter and how it's changed since you've started doing Kickstarter. How did you? What in what ways has Kickstarter changed in the last 10 years or so? What'd you say?
Yeah, so my first Kickstarter, Burning Suns, was in 2013, and then my latest one here, Rogue Angels, is just a couple of months old. So this has been 10 years, and a lot of things have changed. The thing that happened is that Kickstarter came into the scene in 2009. I think they first appeared, and they, through their innovation, they broke down a barrier of entry into the board game market and into other markets. We'll just talk board games here, right? But they broke down that barrier, which was that you needed to get a bank loan in order to facilitate a production and get things out and hope that you could sell it. That was how you did publishing back then, right? Or you went to a publisher and you got a designer fee for designing a game that they would publish. There were 2 routes, and one of them was very expensive and also carried a lot of risk. So with Kickstarter, you eliminated the risk in some sense, because there's still a lot of money involved in creating a board game, but at least it did not hang all on your shoulders in terms of, if this fails, then you will have to pay off a debt for years to come. And that was kind of the game-changing element, and the whole marketing aspects and proof of concept that came in and took the business by surprise, right? So that innovative crowdfunding idea brought down a barrier until it became more mainstream. So when it became more mainstream, more companies started using Kickstarter, whether they needed it or not. And I'm not going on to judge that because I understand the ideas of why people would do it and why they would continue using Kickstarter, or they would use Kickstarter even if they had the economical or financial assets to avoid it. So, and when enough people use something, enough knowledge goes into it, then the innovation dies and it becomes mainstream. And when it becomes mainstream, people and companies become more cynical, and not on a personal level, but on a very practical level. So in the beginning, you had Kickstarter was for A-movers and for those trendsetters who wanted to see something different, and they could go, and those people are willing to accept a lot of difficulties in order to get that. You remember the first flat screen TVs, right? People would buy them for like 5,000 euros or dollars or whatever, right? And it would be like, yeah, because that's the first, right? And then 3 years later, you could get one for $500, right? And those people have kind of moved on. Some have stuck on Kickstarter, right? But then you get to the majority of those who now use Kickstarter, and those people are more interested in a good deal. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's the natural outcome of how things work and how innovation becomes mainstream. But that means that now you have to appeal to a different type of audience who, through a lot of cultivating of very successful and very financially strong companies, are now used to very high-end products with a lot of value for money, or at least content for money. Value is, subject of the person who has it, right? But which means that you have to put a lot more effort and money into the Kickstarter before you have your campaign, before you can then hopefully produce the game. So the barrier that was kind of broken down, which was the entry level and getting all these finances ready to actually produce the game, that barrier has moved and is now kind of re-erected again because of how people perceive Kickstarter today as just a more advanced pre-ordering system, right? So yeah,
that's interesting.
that was the short version of it.
So has that crowd that is okay with like looking for those trend-setting, innovative projects, has that moved to other Kickstarter, like other crowdfunding programs, or is it just has that trend also been the same thing in like other crowdfunding programs?
Yeah, I think that goes for crowdfunding in general. And I think some trendsetters, they move on, and when they cannot be, and not in necessarily a they do it on purpose. It can be just like how they function, right? They want to be where the next things is going to be developed, and the next thing is not necessarily on Kickstarter anymore. So there might be some other things coming up, or some other trends that we'll see and we'll recognize once it's a little bit too late, right? Because that's what it is with trends, is that you see them once they are actually becoming trends, right? So they are just not the majority anymore. So the majority are more regular people, for lack of better word, right? So and that means that they are you have to appeal to a different audience. We're not talking about like what they like, but how they want their products to look like. So it doesn't matter if it's fantasy or sci-fi or TV or whatever, but just like, what do they expect from the product? So those people who expect more from the product and who have a more like critical view on the product, they are just in the majority, where that was not the case 8 years ago or 7 years ago.
Okay.
So, but again, there's nothing wrong with any of it. It's the natural progression of things.
So how does this impact, like if you're an independent, if you're listening to this and you're an independent artist or you're an independent creator and you're coming onto the scene and you have like, say, a board game or something it is that you're trying to put together and put in front of people, how has this experience changed the way that you would approach it, or would you have approached it differently? Or
I think actually I don't think I've approached it differently. The thing is, more of your product has to be done, and more of your product has to be visually and appealing, and has to be tactile. So like, for perspective, and it is not completely fair because there's a 10 years gap, so many other things have changed in society in general, right? But to take the first game I created in 13, I created 2 or 3 prototypes. I sent out to 3 or 4 reviewers, one of them being Tom Vassell back then, where he did board game reviews himself, or previews himself, because that was back then. And I managed to get like 1,300 backers in that month. I ran my campaign, and today for my other for my Rogue Angels campaign, I had 50 prototypes that I sent out to 50 plus reviewers. And I got 1,900 backers. So, and in terms of money invested before the campaign, I would say I probably invested 3 or 4, maybe $5,000 on my first, Burning Suns, and for Rogue Angels, I've invested $25,000, I think, upfront before the campaign launch, right? So that is, and that's the reality of it. It's nobody's fault per se. It's not like there's a lot of good that also comes out of having a more mainstream, ready available crowdfunding platform, because there is also a lot of more competent people to reach out to, more competent artists. So the sphere you are in has also developed, right, a lot, and there are many people who are very, very skilled at their job, right? So there's a lot of benefits. It's just the reality is that now you need a lot more funding upfront before you start funding the Kickstarter, right? And also a lot more time in gathering the hype or the community potential, because there are many more games vying for people's money.
So how do you build that hype around the game itself? Like you complete the game entirely before you go into the phase of promoting it and building a community, or you have prototypes that you put out incrementally to like game tester groups, and then that starts to get something churning, and then it just snowballs from there?
I think in terms of development and building a community, because those are also two races that you run, simultaneously to some extent. So it's never really sustainable to just put out an idea, in the terms that the ideas are dime a dozen, and it's all about the execution. So you have to get to a certain point where you have a somewhat playable something, and you always start by iterating with people in your local community, which you should, because there's no need to try to gather hype of something that may change face for 50 times before you get to the end product. But once you get to a point where, okay, now I have something that makes sense and that is functional. So I started, of course, I had some from Burning Suns. I had a community of some size from there, but I still had to, because of the many years in between, I still had to build a lot of it from scratch, or gather people again, because I was not rolling on a wave of success or anything. So I once I had my first artwork and could present a prototype with some sort of presence, some sort of table presence, that was when I started also leaking the footage of this is what I'm working on, right? And it took off when I did the Tabletop Simulator mod, because that allowed me to just indiscriminately just share it with everyone and just go nuts and say, yeah, well it's here, you just log in, I put the rule book in the mod as well, and you just you can check it out, you can play as to your heart's content. And this was also in the beginning of the COVID, which means that a lot of people turned to Tabletop Simulator for a while and had to deal with playing online instead. So that was a good coincidence. But yeah, it still required a lot of getting people interested in just logging on the first time and try the game, and then go from there.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up with this next one. But I wanted to get like, what is your advice for people that are trying to do their own independent project? And do you think this is the best time for independent creatives? Like, what kind of opportunities do you see that could be capitalized on by people today?
Okay, there are many facets of that question. There are the timing. It will always be good and bad. I guess there will always be some conditions that are worse and some conditions that are better. Mm-hmm. So, like we talked about previously, like in terms of what else is in the market, you could say from the big creative companies of Blizzard and EA and Disney and all those that are floundering around, like they don't know really how to capture the audience in the same way as they did. We'll just leave politics out of that, but they have an inability to really captivate people like before, which means there is a gap for indie developers and indie publishers to provide people the audience with what they really want. So from that perspective, it's a good timing. From a crowdfunding perspective, it's a bad timing compared to 5 years ago because, you know, the war or the wars and, you know, everything else just turning to shite. Like a lot of things are not going great when it comes to the financial aspect of people's lives, meaning that there are less money to be, you know, pulling from. So that's not a great timing. And with crowdfunding no longer being an innovative thing, it means that you have a lot of upfront costs and how to get into the market. And so on that aspect, you're not as good off as you were 5 years ago. But I mean, this is the time we live in. This is the now, and you know, there's no working around that. You just have to deal the cards you've been played, right, or been dealt. So there's some good and some bad aspects of it. And in terms of what you have to be very selective of what you want to do, because I think the more focused you are in your execution of your product, the better it will turn out. Because there is not a lot of room for the thing that appeals to everyone. Like the whole superhero thing appealing to everyone, the whole, you know, suddenly Star Wars should appeal to everyone and all that. Like the appealing to everyone means you're appealing to no one, and which you will suffer from in the end. So you have to pick an audience and you have to go for them, or you have to pick yourself as an audience, as I've done with my games, and be like, I want to find more people like me who enjoy science fiction of this particular type, and then go after those people.
So you would say, in a sense, it's like you have to stop looking at the market and trying to aim at the market before you figure out what it is that genuinely is interesting to you, that you're willing to go through this whole long process of sticking with something. Because if you're just doing it because you think you're gonna make money with it or something like that, you're not gonna have the passion for it. And not only not gonna have the passion for it, but you're also not gonna find that audience.
Yeah. I mean, if you're doing mainstream, which is also a thing and should be a thing, and people should definitely do if they have the capacity. But if you're doing mainstream, you have to. It has to be shorter projects. It has to be, you know, you would probably end up designing something for some other publishers, right? Or in general, it has to be smaller products, because the passion, if you have to carry a passion for something, you will, as a independent, you will probably have to carry it for 2, 3 or 4, 5 years, which means it has to be something that really appeals to you. I still enjoy playing Rogue Ancient. I still enjoy working on it and writing new elements for it, and I still enjoy watching people play it. And that this is after 4 years of development and working on it. And I wouldn't be able to do that if it was a mainstream thing, or if it was something that, you know, I would hate it at some point. So that's how I survive and, you know, keep going.
Okay, cool, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to chat with me. I'm going to include all of your links in the description below. And like I said, thank you, and thank you for all the people watching this. And take care, guys.
Bye bye.